When I was younger, we used to try to hold beach balls and basketballs underwater at the pool or the beach, and we would even try to stand on them. My little arms would be shoving it down while the ball would be resisting it, trying to get back to the surface. For a few brief moments of victory, I would be able to stand on the ball until eventually it would find a way to pop back up out of the water. I know I made a bold claim in the last video. I said that Dawkins knows he's living in a universe created by God, and I want to explain that claim in this video. Unbelief is not so much about the intellect as it is about the heart. The real motive for refusing to believe in God is hidden under the surface reasons, such as a lack of evidence, science first religion, suffering in the world, religion causing wars, and the many other arguments that we're used to hearing or even making. So what is the real motive? Well, I'll get to that, but first let's consider what the human heart tends to do with the evidence. The reality is, the internal and external evidence for the existence of God is roaring around us every second. Romans chapter 1 verse 20 tells us that we have so much of this evidence that we actually have no excuse for denying God's existence. It isn't about the evidence, it's about what we do with that evidence. Our first example is the nation of Israel on its extensive Sinai desert tour. The evidence for God's existence and goodness was all around them. They had witnessed the 10 plagues in Egypt, they'd seen a sea divide in two, they had daily watched bread fall from heaven. Every day they walked behind a massive pillar of fire and cloud, and they saw that God could get water from a stone. Yet Psalm 95 describes them as a generation who hardened their heart against God, and the author of Hebrews calls this unbelief. How can there be unbelief with all this evidence? Because it isn't about the evidence, it's about the heart that witnesses the evidence. In our second example, we see Christ on earth performing miracle after miracle. He made the blind see, the deaf hear, the leper clean, the lame walk, the dead live, the empty full, the storms calm, the demons flee, the water wine, and the sea walkable. Yet with all this evidence, the generation hardened their heart against him and cried for him to be crucified. You see, it isn't about the evidence, it's about the heart that witnesses the evidence. I'd like to tell you about what the Bible says about the heart that receives the evidence. In John chapter 3, verse 19 to 21, we're told that people do not come to the light of the truth because they love the darkness. And the reason they love darkness is because their deeds are evil. In 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 10 to 12, we're told that people do not accept the truth of the gospel because they have pleasure in unrighteousness. In Romans chapter 1, verse 18, we're told that people suppress the truth of God's existence because of sin. The act of suppressing something is willful and active. In order to hold a basketball underwater, I need to continue to push it down. The moment I let go, the basketball would bounce up and potentially hit me in the face. Unbelief is not passive. I need to continue and actively suppress the evidence around me in order to continue in unbelief. Therefore, there is no such person who can truthfully say, I just don't believe that sort of thing about God's existence. Now, I didn't say there's no such person who says it. I said that there's no such person who can truthfully say it. According to Romans chapter 1, verse 18, every single moment a person lives in unbelief is an active and willful moment of truth suppression. Romans 1 continues on by detailing step by step the digression and motive of unbelief stated in verse 18. So first of all, the evidence for God is clearly seen and understood by all of us in verse 19 to 20. We know this, but we do not want to worship him in verse 21. We willingly worship anything else instead of God and create gods that suit us in verse 22 to 25. We willingly love sin and so do not want thoughts of God to interrupt our pursuit of it, verse 26 to 28. We willingly fill our lives with every kind of evil thought and deed and celebrate others as they do it too, even though we know we are in rebellion and worthy of judgment, verse 29 to 32. Here's the reality. We love sin. We love it so much that we're willing to commit rational and spiritual suicide to pursue it. We're willing to deny our Creator because He gets in the way of what we want. We're willing to continue to actively and willfully deny what we know is true. We don't want God in our minds because we know we're rebelling against His good law, and we know that we will face judgment because of that. But because of our love of sin, our fear of judgment, and our hatred of God, we willingly blind ourselves to those truths. Or again, as Romans 1 verse 18 explains, we knowingly suppress the truth. We all know God exists. We all know that He's the creator of the universe. We all know His commands are good and true. We all know there is righteous judgment for breaking these good commands. But we would rather attempt the impossible task of fabricating a worldview in which God doesn't exist, swinging on the pendulum, so that we can carry on breaking His law without thinking about the consequences. We want, if I can go back to my illustration, to keep the basketball underwater.